So, what up, YouTube? How you guys doing today? At the time of this recording, we're in the middle of or possibly the end of the OGL crisis. I'm not sure. Um, I'm recording this the day after Paizo announced the ORC, which seems pretty cool. And so I was looking into it. I'm like, all right, well, WotC was a great company for about 9 years, and they're like, yeah, burn all that to the ground. So I was looking at other game systems, and I watched a video on Pathfinder 2.0. Do I want to switch to Pathfinder 2.0? I have a feeling that's where Critical Role might be going, so it might be a good system to get into. I mean, they started off in Pathfinder, so, makes sense they might go back to Pathfinder now that WotC's going to make them give them 25% of all of their profit. Yeah, that's going to be fun. But anyway, so I was looking into it, and I watched the video on, like why Pathfinder 2.0 is better than D&D 5e. I was like, all right, I'm in. Why? And every reason they gave made me disagree with the premise that it was better. Three action economy or two actions in a move or whatever it is. It's like more player actions on their turn. I'm like, that's gonna make turns slower. Good. More feats. You get a feat every level from like 18 different sources. More complication for characters. Makes it harder to DM. Great. Or GM. Sorry. DM is a trademark term. Makes it harder to GM. Great. That sounds like fun too. But like the XP system is just 1,000 per level, so you don't have those things where you start off advancing quickly and then you slow down. I'm like, no, I want to slow down. I want advancement to slow down. I was slowing down advancement in 5e on purpose because it allows you to learn your character better and it makes the game better by slowing it down. That's why I use XP, by the way, instead of milestones, because milestones buys human psychology. We like to feel like we're advancing. We like to feel like there's things happening in our lives, right? Milestone, it's like you're either leveling or you're not, and that's bad. With the XP, you're at least getting something. It's like, oh, I got another 200 XP. Cool. That's 200 little tiny steps closer in that thousand or whatever I need. A couple thousand. I don't know, the table. And I don't need to anymore. So I was looking at other game systems, and yeah, and I'm realizing, so why is it that D&D is so popular? And I realized D&D is the Copenhagen interpretation of role-playing games. What do I mean by that? Well, for those of you who are physics nerds, you know exactly what I'm saying, which is great. For those of you who are not physics nerds, quantum mechanics is a weird and complicated thing. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you try to conceptualize it in a non-mathematical way. It really is just a set of mathematical consequences about the universe. I mean, same with gravity if you think about it, because no one actually can explain. I mean, there's gravitons, it doesn't necessarily work as an explanation. The bending of space-time from Einstein's a little bit better. But the reality is, if you have two objects with mass, they're gonna pull on each other with a force proportional to their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them, and that's just a thing. And in a similar way, quantum mechanics has a lot of crazy stuff, like put a cat in a box with a particle and see what happens, and is it alive or dead? I don't know. It's in a superposition of states because that's what the math says. And people didn't don't like the not knowing why this is the way it is. So people like me have come to terms with it and went, oh, there is no infinite regress. Things just get funky. Of course they do. If it was if it worked in a way that we would understand, there would be another layer underneath that, right? We hit the point where there's no layers underneath anymore. So of course things got weird. And we can understand them mathematically, but we can't understand them conceptually. Copenhagen interpretation was the first attempt, many would say a poor attempt, to conceptualize the underlying physics that make up quantum mechanics, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, Schrodinger's cat was a philosophical attack on the Copenhagen interpretation. Like, this doesn't make sense. How can a cat be in between the states of alive and dead? But the answer is it just is, like, according to the Copenhagen interpretation. And we all go with it, because it was the first major interpretation, and every other interpretation is being judged against it. Back to D&D. D&D was like one of the first role-playing games. Even it wasn't the first. The first one was some Napoleonic War game thing, but it was the first like really codified, because the same guy, I think that was Dave Arneson, and then he started with what became D&D after that with the fantasy medieval stuff, right? So it's sort of the one that we judge other games against. And most games are either overly complicated. I mean, you allegedly need degrees in like 18 different subjects to get Shadowrun to work. Um, I haven't touched Shadowrun since second edition. It might have gotten easier since then, but I just remember the chunky salsa effect when you throw a grenade at somebody in an elevator shaft, and my gosh, the level of math there. I'd rather go back and do quantum mechanics in college. Like that's, wow. Um, so yeah, there's games like that. Like I've looked at Shadowversity's Cogent system, and that seemed overly complicated. Like a lot of games seem overly complicated. Then there's games that are overly simplistic. World of Darkness. I don't know if this is still the case, but running around with a and doing a scramble with clubs, you just blenderize all of your opponents. There's just no game balance there. It's all just it's OP if you play it intelligently. Uh, get your dex to 4, get your melee to 4, or yeah, for melee combat, get your dex to 4, get your melee to 4, and just make 4 attacks every round, and you just kill everything. Um, yeah, that's an example of an undercomplicated system. Dungeon World, which is what I'm looking at right now to switch the game out. I was about to start a 5e game. Like I had session 0 on Saturday, and then all this OGL stuff happened. And I'm realizing my players probably would like Dungeon World better anyway, so I'm switching to Dungeon World, but that's overly simplistic because like, oh my god, I'm gonna attack a skeleton, right? All right, I rolled a 7 plus, so I kind of hit it. I rolled a 10 plus, I definitely hit it. Yay! I'm gonna fight a dragon. Much harder to hit, right? Rolled a 10 plus, I hit it. I mean, granted, you're not supposed to be able to damage a dragon with a sword. It you gotta do all like they do in The Hobbit and like use the environment to kill it, and that's why it only has 16 hit points. So you're probably playing Dungeon World wrong if you're just letting people damage a dragon without having a ballista on hand. But theoretically, avoiding a dragon's breath and avoiding a goblin's arrow are the same level of difficulty because the difficulty is based on your ability score. Rolling 2d6 and comparing that to 6 or lower, 7, 8, 9, or 10 plus, and nothing else. So it's a little overly simplistic in that direction. And other games are overly complicated in the opposite direction. So we all compare them to D&D. And this is, I think, why D&D has been so popular. It's because it became sort of the standard that we judge other games on. And games are either, if someone's like, this game is too complicated, it means it's more complicated than Dungeons and Dragons. If someone says, oh, this game is too simplistic, it means it's simpler than Dungeons and Dragons. But why do we think Dungeons and Dragons has the right level? I mean, we kind of don't. To be honest with you, D&D in and of itself is overcomplicated now. I would say second ed wasn't too overcomplicated. Somewhere between second and third ed was the answer. And I say that because third ed simplified a lot of the rules down to the 1d20 roll, which was probably the best thing that ever happened to D&D was simplifying everything down to one roll. But then character options started increasing exponentially. And that was, I think, one of the problems with D&D. 5e, back before we decided that we all hate WotC now. Again, this is the day after Paizo announced the ORC and in the middle of the whole OGL thing, and Wizards hasn't actually responded yet, but the response they had planned, supposedly, I just saw one D&D shorts on that, and that looked terrible. So we're in that mode right now, but when D&D was already going, hey, let's give every rate, let's create races where you can just like, or sorry, species, where you can just fly or glide or just ignore half the exploration tier. Like the exploration tier, totally thrown out the window. That's what we're doing now. Yeah, so that's fun. So D&D 5e is overcomplicated in and of itself, but that's still sort of the barometer we measure games against. What does all this mean? Well, we need to come up with a game system. And I say we, like at G Bold Press, don't know what Black Flag is. Hopefully it's something more simplistic. That's more simplistic. I know I was looking at a lot of people going to Pathfinder 2, which makes sense. The ORC coming out, the fact that they're like, no, this is going to be open. Your third-party creators are safe here. It's going to be a safe haven. There's a really good chance that that's what Matt Mercer's going to switch to because that's what he started on was Pathfinder 1.0, I think. I want to say it's. I know he started on Pathfinder. I don't remember if it was 1.0 or 2.0, and that's why they had that gunslinger class thing that they brought into 5e is because they were trying to convert a gunslinger thing from Pathfinder because somebody played that. and they had to convert that to 5e so you could play his character. When they switched to 5e, probably because they got a sweetheart deal from WotC, and now they're gonna have to give 25% of all revenue above 750 grand to WotC, assuming that that's what goes through. So clearly, they're probably gonna switch back, and whatever they switch to is probably what a lot of people are gonna go to. Because again, you have the Stranger Things people are probably gonna just get attracted to OSR games because we'd be like, well, you know, what they're playing in Stranger Things is from the 80s. They're not playing 5th edition, they're playing 1st edition. And we call that the old school renaissance now. So come to my table. All the DMs are here. So that's going to happen. They'll lose their Stranger Things people to OSR. They're going to lose the Critical Role people to whatever Matt Mercer plays next. So yeah, they're toasted. They toasted themselves with this OGL, and I don't know if there's any way back from it, given that they kind of shown their hand as, yeah, I have a video on why I think this happened, based on my experiences as a data scientist at Microsoft and then trying to get a job as a data scientist in the area. I don't live that far from Renton. I did apply to a job as a data analyst at Wizards of the Coast. I was wondering if I could spin that into a data science job after a year or so, and they were like, yeah, we don't do that. Which is obvious that they don't pay attention to data. Yeah, this OSR is definitely done blind. So anyway, back to sort of the point, the Copenhagen Interpretation point here is that we base whether things are complicated or not on what we know, and what we know is D&D. If you're going to compete, if you're going to create the next game that is going to pick up all the D&D fans, you're going to have to create something that's not more complicated. Honestly, more simple would be better. Of course, the problem with more simple is then that's fewer player options, and fewer player options means less things you can sell to players, because selling to GMs is kind of going to get you in trouble in the long run, because that's like one person at every table buying everything, and that's kind of been the model for a while, and it's not a very tenable model. I think that's why TSR went under. They ran out of player options to give to players that didn't just completely break everything. I think it was called Player Options, Skills and Powers. I'm looking at you. That was a terrible book. But it was where they had to go, because DMs just were inundated with adventures, and players had once you had all those brown books, you were done, right? That's what I think killed Second Ed financially. There was also some other bad decisions and things, but that's the impression I got at the time playing Second Ed in the 90s. Yeah, so we're gonna have to come up with a system that's less complicated than D&D, but still takes into account the environment. And I keep saying takes into account the environment, takes into account your enemies, because I'm looking at Dungeon World. I like the idea of Dungeon World. I don't like that it's not tactical. I don't like that it's not grid-based. While I do think that having something more simplistic, where the grid is more of a, hey, this is where everybody is, and less of a, you only have 30 feet of movement, therefore you can't get to there, you have to do this, you have to do that. I think that is going to be an issue, and I like the action reaction pace of something like Dungeon World. So I'm actually thinking of modifying Dungeon World to be more tactical and dungeon crawl oriented. So somewhere between Dungeon World and an OSR games, I think, where I want to go. If I get that to work, maybe I'll release that. Who knows? That might be what my channel becomes about. I don't know. But anyway, yeah. So the reason that we like D&D is because it's the Copenhagen Interpretation. It is what we know. It is what we know works. And D&D has had many problems, and I feel like, to be fair to WotC, I think 5e solved most of D&D's problems. The bounded accuracy thing definitely helped. Bounded accuracy and the less reliance on magical items. Like 3rd Ed, you needed certain items. Like, wow, there's all these really cool head slot items, but I'm a wizard, so I need a headband of intellect, because that's the only thing that's going to work for me. Because otherwise my DCs will be too low for my spells to work on any opponent. And that was exactly what the problem with 3rd Ed was. But they solved that with bounded accuracy. What they didn't solve was the exponential wizard linear fighter problem. They tried to solve that in 4th Ed, and it just, nobody liked it, didn't work, felt too much like a video game. And they never solved the hit point problem. I have a video on bounded hit points, which is getting increasingly less relevant to my life, because, what do you call it? Dungeon World doesn't do that. Dungeon World, your hit points are basically what you would have gotten in second ed if you rolled max on the hit die for that class. I mean, it's not based on D&D. It's not an OGL game. And plus your Constitution score, and that's it. Those are your hit points forever. And I do like that. I think that that's a slightly better system. I don't know if I would keep that. Maybe I would do something different. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to think about this if I rewrite that system. But I'm gonna start with just straight Dungeon World, try to make it more tactical and come up with sort of my own house ruling for Dungeon World, and then codify that and see where it goes. So I'm going to be running a Waterdeep game in Dungeon World because I decided to run that. So yeah, that's fun. So anyway, yeah, we'll keep you guys posted on that. Like and subscribe. If you have thoughts on whether or not Pathfinder 2.0 is more complicated than 5e or is simpler, let me know in the comments. But remember, the player options, especially things that affect exploration, are were a huge problem in 1D&D anyway, in D&D itself, and 1D&D especially, like going forward. Also, getting weird racial benefits at like 5th level didn't make any sense, because as I think I've said before, we do get something as like humans, we do get racial effects as we age, but those are mostly things like cancer, which is not like something that you want, right? Like your genetics will can sometimes create huge negatives later on in life. But that's not what they're doing in 1D&D. They're like, I can grow to large. I'm like, well, you just ruined half the dungeon exploration. And yeah, I guess my advice, if you're going to keep playing in a system like that, that has so many player options that it can affect exploration, is just don't, like, oh, it's a 5 foot wide corridor. I guess your character can't go. And then, eventually your players will be like, oh, yeah, let's just play humans. Make life easier. Or you can play Deathbringer. Deathbringer looks like a cool system. A little dark. It's a little grimdark for my liking. The theme, but the rule set is really simple. Almost too simple. It's not going to be a viable game to switch to or to make things for, because everything is just already there, a little fold. So, anyway, like, subscribe, and I will talk to you all later.